All right, so as we begin to get into this coding area here, I'm going to pull this off to the second screen so it's not in the way. And we'll continue. All right, the first thing that they want us to do is take a look at the controller for employee under the create section. So I'm going to open that up on screen here. I'm going to zoom in just a couple of clicks and get these panels out of the way so we have more screen real estate to work with. So the first section they want us to look at is the create section, and I don't know if you guys are catching the subtle differences that are happening here. So I'm looking at the post area for create. So right here, this is the get. I'm going to move down to post, and then I'm going to look at the little changes that they're making individually here. I don't see any changes in the top part here, but I will scroll down. All right, and once again, I was reminding myself that in this we want to actually create a view. So I'm going to make sure that in my PDF I highlight that because I seem to miss it each time. All right, so, and this is where we got stuck last time, if I remember right, in class. I right-clicked right on top of the create method here, the post version, and we went to add a view, and that's where things kind of went haywire. But this time you can see I do have that tool in there and available. So we're going to go ahead and choose add view. Now, in terms of the name, we are going to stick with create, obviously, because it's related to that. The template is one that we're going to adjust. We are going to pull up the create template. So what that means is that's going to give us the form necessary to add the contents to the table structure that we already have. In terms of which model we're working with, it'll be the one that we created, which is the employee model for the simple app. We're going to make sure that the other stuff is unchecked here to match up with what they have on the tutorial on page 105. And if you have all those settings, go ahead and click add. And then that will scaffold out all the items for us. As this scaffolds out, you're going to see that it does build a view for us automatically for create. And that's actually what came up on the screen automatically. Notice that there's, I got a bunch of red underlines here, and I don't know if you guys were getting the same thing or not on these. But it's just all, it takes a little bit sometimes for it to recognize. I don't know if you saw what just happened as it launched. So it created the file, it put it up on the screen. It didn't make the connection back to the namespace right away. It took a little bit of time. And I'm on a pretty fast machine, so I don't know how long that was, maybe 5-10 seconds. So don't go into panic mode as soon as you see a red underline, because sometimes it does take a few seconds to resolve. And then just by virtue of waiting, it kind of took care of itself. All right, as we've been doing, we kind of look at the things that are created, but the real key takeaways here are these, folks, that the scaffolding engine inside of Visual Studio automatically builds out all the form elements for us relative to all the fields that we have available in our table, and just kind of goes through methodically creates all these things for us. And that takes us all the way through the bottom of page 107. All right. When we get to the top of 108, we will take a look at, once again, the employee controller. Let's go back to that. And let's take a look at some of the stuff that needs to be done now in order to do the work. So the scaffolding engine, all it did was build out the form. All right, you guys clear up hopefully on that piece of it. Now we need to put in the code inside the method here to actually make it do something. That code is found on page 108. So that's what I'm working on right now, is pulling that code in, and I'm going to do it kind of all in one fell swoop. Since I have that capability, why not? I'm just going to pull it directly in from the PDF. I am going to have to kind of separate out the lines here a little bit, because you see that the way they ended up in here are not as clean as what's in our document or our tutorial. So I'm just putting everything on its own line right now. All right. Couple interesting things here. We're instantiating employee, which means that we're pulling in all the data and treating it as an object. And then we have a collection of little commands here that really all they're going to do is name things and then also equate our syntax to whatever's in the table itself. So you can see some of them are being named a little bit differently. And then we also have the capability to read the stuff in from the form, which is the whole goal in the first place. So make sure you get that code entered in. Once you have that entered in, we should be able to execute this. It should have all the connecting little pieces that we need to pull it all in. So let's go ahead and give it a try. Let's launch the application. And the one thing that we're going to keep getting here, and I'm going to be tempted here to do something about it in about a second here. I'm getting kind of a little fed up with the fact that every time we launch this, it goes right to a fail page. Makes you think like you're not doing your work right? And why is that happening, you guys?
Because you don't have you didn't create homepage.
Yeah, we didn't create an index method. We didn't have it do anything. So one really simple fix would be to actually just put in a little thing that says, hey, this is the homepage. Your application didn't crash, because it's not really crashing. We just don't have anything to take it to. So as soon as I go like this and go to employee, it will pull up the stuff. Now what we want to try here, the thing that we just created, was the create new. So if you click that, see it gives you a blank form. Looks very much like the form that we use for edit, because basically it's the same thing, except this one's tied to the create function. So why don't you go ahead and add some stuff in here. And in terms of a joining date, oh gosh, let's make it a couple of days from now. And an age that makes some sort of sense. That's fine. And then you can see that it created it and then added it in. So hopefully you guys have that piece of it working. And that's kind of a weird little thing, because we created the edit thing first and now we're creating the create new thing second. One question you might ask is, could we have done that all in one fell swoop? And the answer is absolutely yes, right? Sometimes you don't do that on purpose though, so that you don't have too much stuff that's not functioning in your application that you have to build out. So, well, I'm going to work on edit right now, so you just do edit and you just focus on that, get that working, and then you can come back and adjust. Now the thing that I know a lot of students kind of freak out to is, okay, so you told us what code practice. So if you start doing a connection here as to what we did, this is the piece that reads in from our model. Okay, so whatever we have built into our model, that's the piece that's going to read it in. These other pieces, you guys notice the name, the date of birth, all these things, how these are pieces of text that we applied to the form. All right, that's all we did with that. And then the rest of this is just a matter of setting up variables, reading in the information by basically parsing it from the form and converting it natively to the format that we need. So what tools you might need here are really going to depend on the kind of stuff that you're building. That comes with a little bit of experience. But hopefully there's like a correlation here where you can see that we're working with text in some cases. In some cases we're working with date times, right? And you can see that they do a parse on it. And then with the age, they're just parsing that directly into an integer. And these are just kind of methodical things that we do. All right, I'm going to go ahead and hit the stop on this. And if you guys you want to get rid of that that problematic, when you land on the first page, one thing that you might do, and I'm just suggesting here, is that you could always, for index, create something that would fix it. But this is not the space to do it. You would actually need to create it here. But let's do this one step at a time. In fact, I think that I'm going to kind of avoid that for right now. I think we'll get our opportunity. All right, so if you followed through that example, we are now going to kind of ramp it up just another step. All right, we want to actually make this now connect directly to our object model with the hopes of then writing that eventually back to the database itself. And I don't know if you guys are catching this, but right now we're kind of working with data in midair. The data was really specified, in a separate file. And when we use that file, and that was this one here, that gave us our structure. But in order to write it back to a database, we actually have to have a database to connect to, and that's coming really soon, just so you know. All right, let's go back to the controller. At the bottom of page 111, we need to actually go back to that create method, and this time we need to actually kind of strip it down a little bit to make things bind, and here's kind of the fun part of it. We're going to strip out some of the code that we just added. All right, so we're going to boil this down to this. We're going to get rid of everything below the add. So let's get rid of all of these lines first. I'm just going to do a cut on those. And actually, let me do a Control-C. I apologize. Because we are going to keep the last line. All right, so pass in the employee object. You got to spell it right, though. Like so. So instead of us specifying each field here, we're reading in the object, passing it in, we're letting the form do the work, and then after the form is done, all the method's going to do is add it back to the employee object that we're working with. That's the code right there. All right. The other thing that they're having us look at here, it says, I'm on page 112 right now. All right. And the second full paragraph, it says, for our employee model, the ID of the HTML input field should be the same as the property names of the employee model, and you can see that Visual Studio is using the same names while creating the view. So if you go back to that create, I'm going to do a save on that file, and they're having us look for the model name for the form control. So let me see if I can find that here. This stuff is not word wrapping, so maybe we can give it a little more space. You guys remember how to make it word wrap? I know everybody kind of forgets, but you go to Tools, Options, and then you find your text editor. I think right here. There we go. And that's going to help us find it. So we're going to be looking for this line here, I believe. One for name. And this, what I'm noticing is it's actually a little bit different. You see the name, see the age, but the actual declaration itself is a little bit different. So the particular line that they're pointing out to us is this one here. So what it's showing is that because we're working with a particular model, it ties directly to the model or the name in the model before the data gets pushed back. Let's go ahead and run this now and see with the little change that we just made if this will still run just fine. It should. All right, screen number 2 again. All All right. Now, interestingly, I was already on the create page when I launched this, so that's where it launched to. So let's go ahead and type in some nonsense of sorts and see what we can put in here and see if it still works. And it does. Okay. Are you guys having the same effect? Yours is working okay? All right, let's assume so. All right. And that actually completes section 14. So if you made that change, then you're all good to go. For me, the big takeaway is this in this chapter. When you looked at what we put in here, where we can manually run, throw a collection that comes in here, but that's in a generic format. So in order for us to have tied it back, we needed to get really specific in this section. The easier way to do it is what we just saw, where you just pass the whole object in once it's instantiated, and then we run the create form. Create form does all the work for us, throws it back to the model, and then this simply adds it back so it can be displayed on screen. That's our huge takeaway. All right, let's move on to section 15. And we so far have been working with the concept of data. So I want to really make an important distinction here, because so far we've been working with data that we're like pre-feeding into the application, and we're working with a model that we've described in the class, but we really haven't connected to a database as of yet. Here's where we're going to start taking that step forward. Now, it's not wrong to necessarily build an application where the data is hard-coded the way that we did it. It still works with the MVC structure, but really the big goal in these projects, folks, is to get that database connection going. In order to get that database connection going, we do need to throw in an additional tool that's part of the Visual Studio infrastructure that will give us that capability. And that tool is called the Entity Framework. What's really kind of neat about the Entity Framework is it supports a couple of different ways of working with databases. The one approach is to connect to a database that already exists. The secondary approach, which is the one that MVC people love so much, is to do what we call a code-first approach, where the code actually dictates the database and creates it basically on the fly from scratch, without actually having to do any database work or typing in one single SQL statement, which I think is very, very cool when you stop and think of it in that regard. So we will keep this same application up and running right now, which is the MVC Simple app that we had open in section 14. And the first thing that we need to do is actually install the Entity Framework. And in order to do that, we have to do that through the Nougat Package Manager. First step is going to be to highlight the root of your project just like this, and then give it a right click. And then a little ways down the screen here, you're going to see Manage Nougat Packages. All right, so make sure you click on that, and that brings in this tool that will allow us to do exactly that, which is to add the Entity Framework. So come up here to the search window and just type in Entity Framework. And right now you see it's, I'm doing kind of a little gaffe here, because what is it searching? What's installed, which, it's not installed, right? So we're going to actually go to Browse, and there we go. And you want to choose just the main Entity Framework, and you notice that there's a bunch of different little tools that you can throw in to go with it, depending on the kind of stuff you want to do. We're not worried about those things right now, but we are worried about this. Let's go ahead and click on that, and then make sure you also take a look at the version number whenever you're doing this kind of work. We're working from a tutorial, and I'm looking at the screen kind of squinting right now at the tutorial document, trying to see what version they were using back then. And it looks like 6.1.2 is what they used. Not that that's going to have much of a issue, honestly. The other thing that you might want to do is look at some of the options that go with. None of these really are going to affect anything that we're doing, so we're going to leave them alone, but there's times where they absolutely might. All right, I'm going to go ahead and click Install. Now what this is doing is, you can see in the background, it's actually downloading the product, and then it's actually installing it into our application. And yes, there's a license agreement that goes with it, because it really is technically a separate piece of software. And then you can see in the console window here how it's going through the process of downloading, unzipping, installing, and applying to our application. All right, and it looks like everything finished successfully. It did pop away from the output screen as soon as it was done. And it did add some stuff over to our project structure as well. So that process of installing Nougat packages for Visual Studio, that's something that you get used to as a .NET developer. Very often we're going to add libraries in that are going to extend our capabilities. And in order for us to really work with the databases properly, this is absolutely required. So one thing that we need to do to make this tie into a database now is we are going to need to go to the employee model that we have and add in references that will allow context for the database. And that is shown actually on page 118 right in the middle. That's where I'm at right now. And we're going to move into this and then move on to the subsequent pages. So in the employee controller, I just want you to just do a really quick kind of review here, because this is the controller. This isn't where we're going to do the model work, actually. But I just want you to just take a look at these lines right now, because there's a very strong chance that we have to make adjustments to some of these things. Because currently, when we're going to be pulling in the model, whatever model it is we're pulling in, it's coming from this location. And it doesn't take much to figure it out, because MVC Simple App is our app, models is our folder, and then anything that's inside there gets fed in. Okay, so that's kind of what it's telling us. But we want to be aware, because now we're going to go to this file here, right? That's the actual model file that they're showing on page 118, and we need to add a couple of things in here to make sure that this works with the database context. So if you look at the bottom of page 118, they have a few statements in there, and we have all of those except for one. And the other thing that I've kind of learned over time is, if I'm given an example, especially if it's in writing, I sometimes follow the exact placement of where they're placing things on purpose. So they want us to add this line here that basically pulls in that entity framework as a structure into our application. All right, so that's an important piece. All right, it shouldn't have any change to the initial part of our application. So like the original declaration that built the class employee, where we have our ID, our name, our joining date, and the age, those will all stay in place. However, we do need to add another piece in the mix here that sets up the context for the database, and I'm going to try to just copy this in, and hopefully it'll come in clean. So I'm just pulling this right from the PDF. This is at the top of page 119. And when I say page 119, those are the printed page numbers that are in the corners of all the pages. And then the way that they're laying this out, I'm going to try to match the layout as best I can. All right. And this is a little crude, but this is what the setup is. And so what this is doing is it's just setting up the database to be able to operate as an entity on its own, with all the gets and sets that go with everything that's inside that as an object. And I want you to notice too that here, as they're referring to it, notice how they're referring to it in the plural. as opposed to the singular. Like here we're calling it employee, and here we're calling it employees. All right. So really what this is doing is it's setting up an entity for us that will be able to be queried and then ultimately saved. So anytime we add stuff to it, it's not going to go away. It's still going to be there. The other thing that that we may need to do, and here's kind of a trick, and I'm going to pull this back over to the screen because I have it highlighted quite a bit, so you guys can see my highlights here. So if we were working with a database that was pre-created, we would be required to add a connection string to that database, whatever that would happen to be, wherever it was located, whether it was part of the project or an external source, and that would go into our web config file. So those of you that have done this kind of work in other programming languages, and I think most notably Java, because I'm teaching that class currently right now as well, where we have to bring in a connector piece, and then we have to, with code, pull in all the SQL tools in Java, and then have a connection string that puts your username, password, all that stuff in there. But notice what I have highlighted right below it. You don't actually need to add the connection string. Notice what it says right below that. If you don't specify a connection string, the entity frame will create a local database in the user's directory with a fully qualified name based on the context that we just set up above. Are you guys catching this? Okay, so here's where your local instances of SQL Server come into play. If you're not running SQL Server locally on your machine, and I happen to be in the category of I'm not, then Visual Studio will kick in and create an internal database that will do this. If you happen to be running SQL Server, then it will create that database inside of SQL Server. So you guys just need to know where to be able to go and look and pull that in and make that connection. Once we run the code, it actually will kind of do all the connection string stuff for us automatically. It'll recognize that you have SQL Server running on your machine if you do, and then just kind of put it in. So we're going to let it do its work. There's no reason to try to manually put it in, screw up the syntax, and then have it not work. That makes no sense. You know, that's kind of my take on it. All right. So let's do what that second highlight said. It says first we create a private employee context class object and update the index, create and edit action methods as shown in the following code. All right, so here's where we're going to get back to the employee controller. All right, so let's go ahead and do that. Let's go back to the employee controller. I'm going to move this back over to the other screen. All right, so back to the employee controller. Let's save this document while we're at it. And then we are going to start very slowly looking at the stuff that's inside here. So now one thing I noticed right off the bat is this. I'm looking at the employee controller, and there's a significantly simplified list of using statements. Did you guys notice that? Now, do I go ahead and just blow those all away? No, absolutely not. Why should I? If I have an extraneous one, it will tell me and I can remove it, but there's no reason to get rid of it. What they are showing you, though, is that you do need to have these three available, which is the simple app models, system link, and system web MVC should all be available. So this one, and this one are the ones that tie us into our data. So you got to make sure that that's there. Next thing that we're going to do is we're going to go down to that very first method here, and just before it starts, so above the get statement here, we're going to be setting up, in essence, a global here that will pull in the data based upon the database context that we set up. And you see how it does find it in the list here automatically as soon as I start typing. And then I'm just going to kind of abbreviate and call this DB for database, as the book does, and then that will be equal to a new instance of that with the constructor. All right. So that makes it global. That means all the methods now can access it from within here, but it does have to be from within this particular controller. Now let's carefully scroll down and make some edits that will make this all work. The first thing that we're going to do is we're going to remove the list that we are working with in the previous chapter and actually context it over to the database. So I'm going to put in DB, that pulls in the whole database, and then employees, which is what we named that, if you remember, in the database context. And when at all possible, let the auto type complete it for you. You can see how I was fumbling with the keys. And then the rest of this should all be okay. As we scroll down, let's just double check everything and make sure that these are okay. Create's okay. And then when we get to the post version of create, that's where we start to see some changes. So I'm going to just, once again, copy the stuff in. We are going to leave the object pass in the arguments, but we are now going to ramp up this statement. We're going to basically adjust this statement to read as follows. And then notice that statement was changed, and really we removed the list name from the beginning and then just contexted it over to the database and the alternate name for the database, and then we issue a command to save changes. Now that becomes pretty important when you're working with a database and anytime you're changing a record or a field, to make sure that you save it back before you release the data for somebody else to be able to work with it. Moving down to the edit area, there's some more things that need to be adjusted. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to paste these all in, and we're going to be getting rid of the list. That goes away. The variable stays the same, but we're going to change the list portion of it to be db.employees, just like this, and the rest of it will stay identical. Just a very simple little change. Moving down to the post version of edit, got a couple little tweaks there as well. So right here, once again, same change in the same spot, because we're, in essence, we're doing the same type of work here, right? Just a little quick edit. Employees. And then down below here, if that succeeds, then we're going to go ahead and save changes. I already typed save changes here, so why not just copy it? So I'm going to bring that back, and that's going to go right inside the method call, or excuse me, the if statement here, excuse me. And I believe that's all the edits we're going to do right now. The hard-coded data will stay for now. All right, let's go ahead and save everything. I'll do a save all, and let's go ahead and run this. All right, now we do have something different going on in the background, and I think this is pretty important to note. We're still going to end up at a page where, you know, we don't have an index thing set up, so it's going to do what it does. But ultimately, we are going to go to the URL for employee. So let's wait till it does it. Now, of course, I could hotwire this. I could pull up the employee view and launch from there, and then it would go right to the employee view, and I wouldn't have to worry about it. But now it is taking a little bit longer. You notice to launch. I don't know if you guys are catching that. What's happening in the background now is things are getting built, because we have what we're doing is a code-first approach here. I'm kind of watching my application structure here in the background at the same time. All right. So that was anticipated. Let's go ahead and add employee to the mix, and that should bring up our employee page. Oh, and it looks like I got a little bit of an error here on mine. Did you guys have this happen to you too?
Yeah.
Did you say no or yes?
No.
Well, lucky you that it didn't happen to you. So right now I'm trying to figure out why it happened. So it's giving me actually a whole list of little errors here. System data exception occurred while initializing the database. Cannot attach to the app data as a database based on this context. So it's what it should be doing is this, and what it's trying to tell you is it's trying to connect to a database, and really what it should be doing is creating that. Now, here's a little bit of the problem that we have. If you look at the way the book is doing it, and so let me see if I can bring that back over. Very janky coming over. They go ahead. I'm trying to look for the output screen here. You should be seeing something that looks like this, right? So what it should do is it should create the database with nothing in it, is really what it should do. What mistake did I make? You guys kind of keyed in on it yet? Well, first of all, I guess I could check that code, like right in the spot where they're pointing to. Did I do it incorrectly? No. To me, it looks like I did just fine. Okay? So then the question becomes, what did I screw up that is not having it work? And you see what I'm doing here. Yeah, and really this is the problem here, is the empty database set. I don't see it as a problem though, it's not like an errant piece of code. But if I look in the book on page 120, scrolling down to page 121, I have all this data that in my control. You guys remember this? So what I'm catching here is I don't need this stuff anymore, right? That should go away. Is there anybody here that might disagree? Right, because in the two previous approaches that we used, we first just hard-coded some data, then we created a list, right, and we were able to work with both of those. But now we don't need either one of those. So let's go ahead and save that. Let's stop the application from running, because it's just kind of spiraling in the background, right? Let's try to run it one more time. Maybe this time it will actually build because I don't have data that I'm trying to force into something that doesn't exist yet. All right, there's the browser coming up. And I'm trying to strategically narrow up my window here to kind of watch what's happening in the background at the same time. So I'm kind of moving this over and I'm kind of watching for errors to fly. All right. There's the page that doesn't work, right? We know that. All right, well, let's go ahead and drop in employee. All right, and once again, I'm ending up back in the same spot, so I got to do some checking here before this will work. You guys getting the same effect?
Actually, mine is working with
With the stuff I just deleted?
Yeah.
All right. So I maybe preemptively deleted the stuff when I shouldn't have. Now, right now, I'm reading this as, it hasn't done the work quite yet, right? Because, it's still spinning, but it is giving me an unhandled exception. So I'm wondering if I might be missing an exception handler. So let's see if maybe one was thrown in and I just didn't see it. So here I go back to our document. Yeah, and I'm going to tell you what. This example doesn't have those extra libraries in there. Should I remove those extra libraries? Or should I first Control Z and put all this stuff back in there?
You can comment it out.
It's true. You know, and the truth is, it kind of maybe doesn't even matter that it's sitting there because I'm not really referring to these objects anymore. And the one thing I am going to do is I'm just going to kind of look back through and make sure that any calls to any data are in the format of the database. Database. That all looks okay. And, all right, let's save it. All right, so I'm trying to do a little troubleshooting here to figure out why this isn't quite working the way that I'd like it to. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go to kind of one of my default little tricks here that you guys should start being familiar with. And I'm going to right-click on the project node here, and I'm going to do what they call a clean and build. And really what that means is I'm just kind of blowing away all the stuff that's sitting in memory and then kind of working past that. So I'm going to go ahead and do a clean. And it looks like it succeeded. Then I'm going to right-click and do a build. Not that this is going to keep my project from running, but you know, it doesn't hurt to try. So that's always kind of my first de facto thing to do in a .NET application, is to try that trick first. So here we go once again. Try to be optimistic here. The other thing I'm going to check if this still fails is I'm going to start going back and checking my syntax and the naming of everything and see if that all matches up. Alright, so remove the application launched as expected. And let's go. And right away, you see how it triggered the exception. Now notice what it's trying to do. So see this folder here? It is trying to connect to the data in the app data directory, and it's just not doing it. And that is where the database will reside when it builds. So if this worked correctly, this is what should happen. It should build a database file in that folder that the application then connects to. But I'm thinking that I'm just missing something. So the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to kind of retrace my steps here. I am going to kill the application from running. I'm going to close the output window for now. And then I'm just going to check my syntax relative to what I believe it should be. And then I have the ultimate failsafe where I can go back to what I did last year. You know, I don't want to go back that far, but certainly doesn't hurt to double check. We do have the framework in there. We set up the database context, and I'm just checking my spelling on everything. Now, I did copy paste it, shouldn't be off, right? I mean, that's the thinking. But you never know. And I'm looking, you know, because when I'm copying from a PDF into my own application, and if I just name one thing differently, that's actually enough to throw it all off. So, all right, then I'm going back to the controller file where I did my other edits. All right, so I'm just, once again, reviewing my settings. So here's what I'm going to do. I'll pull this over. You guys can see my my troubleshooting in effect. Now, it is pretty significant. I mean, I don't have those other libraries listed. I mean, I could comment them out. My feeling is that's not really the right approach, but should I try that? You guys should say yes. right? I think that's going to cause some issues, personally. Oops. All right, let's give that a shot. What worst thing could happen aside from it just not working again? All right, so it's telling me I have build errors and a whole bunch of. So it clearly doesn't like all the stuff I did. I can't even scroll right now. It's like not even responding to my clicks. Trying to be patient here, folks. Yep, there it goes. Finally responding. But you see, it does not like this stuff. And why doesn't it like this stuff? Because I commented out all the stuff that deals with collections. Okay, so here's my thinking. Let's do this. I don't think that these should be removed. I think they're just too essential. And now you notice how most of those highlights went away? And then notice how the list isn't being recognized because I have the other one. So what this is telling me is none of this stuff really is relevant. Granted, we aren't using the list to do the work. Yes, I could just remove it. So here's what I'm going to resort to right now because I do have working versions from previous years. So I'm going to start looking at those right now to hopefully kind of solve this issue. And look at the, I have section 15 complete here, so I can just go to that, which is the nice thing. And see inside that folder, you guys notice, this is what we're supposed to have inside that folder. And that right now is not happening for us. All right, next thing I'm going to do is I'm just going to go first to the controllers file. Actually, let's go to the models first. Now this is opening up a separate instance of Visual Studio, and I probably could have done this more efficiently. But here it is. I should have did a right-click Notepad++ or something like that, but that's okay. So I'm just looking at all the stuff I have listed here. That looks the same, right? Nothing there changed. This all looks the same as well. Let's just double check it side by side. And this is where I'm kind of letting my debugger brain kind of look at this and see if there's anything that's goofy or missing or different, and I'm not seeing any issues. Right, I'm going to go ahead and close that. Let's go back to the file folder, and now let's go over to the controller file. Which is not saved, so let's save that. And we'll start right up at the top. And I'm going to do a Notepad++ this time, just so that we don't have to side screen it, I guess. All right, so with the help of your eyes, please help me look this over. And I'm just going line by line here, folks, just looking at everything, looking for any sort of a difference, especially with the stuff I just added. So notice where that sits. That seems to be in the right spot, named correctly. You guys seeing anything different? No, not at all, me either.
For some reason, mine actually doesn't work without, when you delete all like the previous stuff that we were working with.
Yeah, all the hard-coded stuff?
Yeah. I don't know if maybe it's, I just like I probably forgot like a curly brace somewhere when I deleted it or something like that. Could just be it.
Yeah, that could be. Yeah, this stuff kind of gets a little frustrating when you run into a problem like this. And that's why I'm trying to be really methodical about like checking the issues. And you notice last time what I did comment out all the code. It says from page 77. All right, well, you know what? Let's go ahead and do what they did or what I did. And I'll just go ahead and comment that stuff all out. You know, because if it's not needed, it's not needed. And then my worst case scenario is I copy in my code from last time and we just roll with that. Now, for those of you that might be having the same issue, that's not a very comforting thing, I suppose. And then I think what that should end up doing is, what it's telling us, you see this is grayed out, it's not even using this library here. Doesn't hurt to have it in there. Let's go ahead and save it again. Let me try to run it. And who knows, maybe we'll get lucky this time and it'll work. I should be building a database right now, and once again, and now I'm kind of digging into the stack trace information. Not that you guys need to go this far at this point, but it might give us a little bit of a clue as to what's happening, which is why I'm looking at it. All right, so here's what I'm going to do, folks. I don't want to spend any more time on this. So now I'm going to end up using my code from last year, which is exactly what I didn't want to do in the first place, but here we go, because we don't have much of a choice at this point to kind of work past it. You know, I can look at this till I'm blue in the face trying to figure it out, but here's what's supposed to happen, and we're going to try to make this happen, by the way, is it's supposed to come up with a blank database. And then what will happen is you should have, in terms of your database explorer tool, so if you look at your server explorer, Yeah, and it's just not listing a database, which just shows, right, and I can't connect to one because I don't have one to connect to, but it should create it, and then that connection should come up here, ideally. All right, so that's a little bit of an issue. Then what we're supposed to see is the fact that we can get into the database from within our product directly, which is really kind of cool. But let's see if we can get to that point by using the previous year's work. So I'm going to go ahead and close the solution down, and I apologize that it was so fruitless. This is kind of how it's been going for me with Visual Studio this semester, it seems. But that's okay. That's the beauty of having backups to go to. So I do have stuff that I put on my desktop last week. And I believe this is the right version. And wait, here's how I find out. Wow, there's nothing in there. Okay. So let me go to my OneDrive and get the right version. Which is this one. Now you can see just from how long it's taken to copy how much bigger your projects are getting now, and adding that entity framework really adds a lot of tools into the mix too. A lot of code goes with that. All right. I'm going to go ahead and make sure my solution is closed. It is. All right. And then I'm going to take this failed attempt and rename it. Oops. All right. And of course it's open in another program. The question is which one? Not sure what else it's open inside of. And normally I would pause the video at this point to do the fumbling off screen, but I think it's kind of valuable for you guys to see me struggle through it. I don't have any browser tabs open with that, right? So I'm not sure why it's being so difficult. It's the most simplest of actions, but I cannot complete it. No idea what is going on. So, see, the reason I don't want to change the original, I want to work with the original folder name because all the objects inside of it are based on the namespace that comes from the original file. And if I go changing the root folder name, it really kind of messes up the whole thing. So making another copy. And I'm going to be deleting the solution file on this with intent, just so you guys are aware. I really kind of want to start with a clean slate inside of Visual Studio, and this is my hope that that will fix that. First thing I'm going to do is do a save all just to regenerate the solution file, so it puts it in the local folder. And I'm going to come in here and take a look at the stuff inside here just to make sure that it is the way that I'm intending it to be, and that looks right. This looks right also. That stuff's all commented out. I notice that I have one additional file here, and it's not actually a file, it's just an object inside of here. So I'm not sure I was seeing that, so I wasn't sure that maybe this wasn't registering as an object in the previous application. Let's go ahead and run this and see what happens. It should build out the database. So far, so good. Looking for that browser window. There we go. Get our URL in there.
Might actually work this time.
Say that again, Javier?
Yeah, it might actually work this time.
Yeah, it looks like it's working, and you can see just from the entries that I put in last time. And I try to have a sense of humor about it because you can see their joining date as well as in the future. Although it should be a long time ago in a place far, far away. But all right, so this actually seemed to work, and I showed you guys the code. I didn't have any different code in here, so I'm not sure exactly what the problem was. But let's go ahead and try to do a create new here. And let's just come up with a date. It was a long time ago, right? It was year 0. Yeah, and now this seems to have other issues going on too. Although that part seems to work, but it looks like the create is not working here as intended. Now, I'm not going to freak out to that, and here's why. We weren't really asked to do that particular task, if I remember right, but let's just double check to make sure. All right, let's see if we can do what they're showing in the book here, and that is check to see what the state of the database is. So I'm going to go ahead and just shut this down. And I'm not seeing, see, this is the perplexing part, there should be a database here. All right, so I'm trying to get to the point where this is like behaving the way it should, and here's what I'm doing right now, just so you guys know how I got here, because I had the video paused. Is I went up to my View menu, I went to the SQL Server Object Explorer to bring up this interface here. And it doesn't matter where it comes up on your screen, it could really be anywhere, honestly. And then, you know, usually you'll get a list that looks like this, right? And then you can go ahead and you can start opening up these expando triangles. So this is the local database that's built into my version of Visual Studio. And you can see that it is running kind of like this micro version of SQL Server in the background. The application that we're working on currently is this one. As far as the tables go that go with it, you'll notice that we have the employee table right here. You can do a right click on this and take a look inside of it. So if you click View Designer, it does bring up this interface. And what I'm trying to check and see right now is it doesn't seem to be working very good from the front end. However, it seems like the back end is retaining the data, so some of it is obviously still there. So that's really kind of my concern here. I think that maybe what was happening, and I'm just kind of debating this in my head right now, is that this database that I'm actually looking at right now pre-existed. So in other words, this was here from last fall as opposed to getting created just now. There's some ways to check that, of course, but I am able to go into the actual structure of this and actually take a look at particular values. So right now it looks like we're allowing nulls in the name field, and I'm not really sure I like that. But it also shows us, you know, what is actually creating, you know, the table. So it shows all the database stuff. It shows the actual T-SQL statements that would be used to generate this if we were working from a database tool. And then you can take it a step further, and you can actually start to look at the data that's inside there. And so what you can do is you can right-click this, and then you can actually do a View Data, and it should show the entries. And I tried to add one from the front end, and that was a little perplexing because I just couldn't do it. And I don't know if that was the same effect for you guys or not. But you know what I could do, hypothetically, is I could add something in manually here, right? And that's auto-created. So let's try Java the HUD again. I notice it's giving me a little, right, and it doesn't get committed until we write it. So and let's put in an age of, I don't know, 3. Oh, apparently I can't use that date. Maybe that's why it didn't work from the front end. All right, so 1753 was the earliest. All right, so it seemed like it saved that piece of information. Let's run it one more time. And now that I know that, maybe that's the explanation as to why it didn't write, because I try to be clever on the front end when maybe I shouldn't have been. right, so it did pull it in. Let's try and edit first. Well, maybe we'll call him Pizza the Hut. Bad joke, I know. But let's at least try, see if the edit works. Looks like it did. Let's try to create a new. Let's give me another Star Wars character, you guys.
Okay.
Like so.
Yep.
And we know it's got to be at least 1753, right? So it's 1888. And he's the ripe old age of 234. So let's create. Okay, so now it seems to be working. All right. So when I thought before it wasn't working, it was. All right, so these are remnants. And I remember entering this information in. So it really did not create the database from scratch. That's one key piece here. So what it did is it used the database I created last year. So that's why I didn't see the addition of a database file in that folder. I think that's fascinating when you stop and think about it. Let's close this and shut it down from running. But clearly it's working. We see that that we can manipulate the data and the database from right inside of Visual Studio, and hopefully that works for you guys. Did you guys have any issues with any of that? Okay, we'll assume not. You will notice that when I put in Java the Hut here, that it still has the old information, right? So if I hit refresh, it should go back out there and reread the data in fresh to show that it's actually working with the database. All right. That was a little painful, but that was sections 14 and 15, and I apologize that was so challenging. Let's take a 5-minute break here in class. We'll come back and work on the next 2 sections. Maybe with any luck, we'll get those done tonight too.